So earlier on, we showed a schematic from Daniels and Daniels where they showed the submaximal responses to exercise, that is the economy, and then they did an extrapolation back to the VO2 line, and they predicted what's called the velocity at VO2 max. And this is something that Daniels first proposed in 1984, and it's perhaps not seen as much interest as it really should have done. But he states this: the velocity at VO2 max represents the highest physiological point where aerobic performance can be maintained, and as such provides the theoretical link between VO2 max and performance economy. As we can see here, so again, this is from Daniels. So here we've got our submaximal data, this is our economy data. So 3 different treadmill speeds. Here we've got the VO2 responses at about 40, about 45, 50 and about 55 mils per kilogram per minute. What they've then done on a separate visit maybe, or at the end of these testing, they've taken the VO2 max for the athlete, and we can predict, I don't know if we come across, that's what, in the region of maybe 65 to 70 mils per kilogram per minute. Now that is independent, this is the important bit. That VO2 max value in this calculation is independent of running speed. So all you've got to think about is simply imagining there is a line that runs across the chart. I'm not very good at doing this, but if we take a line that runs across here, like that, and it's a simple extension from the y-axis until this interpolation from the submaximal data hits that horizontal line here. We then extrapolate it back to the x-axis, and that gives us this interaction between economy and VO2 max, which is the velocity at VO2 max. Now you can actually calculate that, of course, by rearranging the y equals mx plus c formula, because we now know what y is. Y is now VO2 max, and therefore we can rearrange the equation. So it's a very, very neat way of connecting these two important parameters. And we can see the difference here. So here we've got male and female athletes, and on the whole, both groups have the same level of economy at these lower running speeds here. The female athletes hit their VO2 max at around about 62, 63 mils per kilogram per minute. The male athletes hit theirs on average at around about 75 millilitres per kilogram per minute. But fundamentally, certainly down here, they're as economical each other. But when you take the interaction between the economy and the VO2 max, look at the difference. There's an enormous difference between the two. Now, had the male, had we got something different, so let's just replot this. So imagine we'd got this done with the males, but with a high VO2 max, but this time that they are less economical. Okay, so we're going to be less economical. Actually, no, I'm going to make them more. No, going to make them less economical down here like this. Okay, so we're hitting the same point here. I'm going to draw my line across. So this is roughly where the VO2 max line is. I'm just drawing the horizontal. Again, this isn't precise. Look at the effect now when you extrapolate it back down. They're still, performance-wise, better, but look at the difference. We've gone from about 380 meters per minute to around about 360. We've lost 20 meters per minute. And again, you could just keep making them less and less economical to demonstrate the point. If I go really uneconomical here, look at that. They would actually have a worse velocity at VO2 max score than the females. Why is it important? It's important because this is actually a really good performance predictor in distances from about 3K to 5K running. And again, we can just re-emphasize the point, which is useful to do. You've got somebody with a poor economy but high max, and then good economy and low max. It's kind of reiterating what we were looking at. Look at how that plays out. So you've got really good economy, but the max isn't as high, so 60.4 compared to 73.3. And we end up with a vVO2 max of what, 328 meters per minute? Now we've got somebody who's far less economical, but has a higher max, and they come in just 7 meters per minute faster. That's all. If they were even more uneconomical, so the line went up here, bang, they'd be worse. So it really does allow for that interaction between these two parameters. And we saw this graph earlier on. This is the graph from Daniels and Daniels. Now you can see why we've got this difference. That here are males. They are more economical than females. They both have the same VO2 max, but the more economical seems to outweigh the max. They have a faster sustainable running speed, velocity at VO2 max. So are there any considerations we need to take into account when assessing vVO2 max? Well, there are a few. First one is we assume the linear work rate relationship. But we know already, we've learnt today that that is constrained by the VO2 slow component. So you can only really work with the economy data that we've already talked about in the moderate and heavy exercise domains. We've got issues that we've referred to in previous sessions for identification of VO2 max. If you're not able to accurately identify the VO2 max, that is, you can't see a plateau or you can't use a secondary response like the heart rate plateau, you aren't sure then whether you've hit VO2 max. Therefore, if you don't know that you've got VO2 max, your interpretation of the velocity at VO2 max lacks validity. And then the other part is, one of the issues that's often raised is when we actually have somebody run at the velocity at VO2 max, there's a large anaerobic contribution to this because you're asking them to run pretty close to VO2 max. And yet this is an aerobic measure. So should we or do we need to take into account the anaerobic contribution within that test?